In, thank you. Where we lived, the city of São Paulo, a ubiquitous concern was the lighting, first of all, and secondly, the traffic. Traffic was a consistent issue in the city. You've heard me talk about this before, but everywhere you would go, no matter what time of day or area of the city, traffic could be a significant issue. And avoiding the worst traffic is a constant motivation for Brazilian drivers. Time of departure, and especially the route that you would choose, was critical. Most deliveries in the city were made by motorcycle, little like 150s or 125s, and the reason for that is because they could drive between the rows of stopped cars. One of the most challenging parts of learning to drive in the city of São Paulo is learning to watch for the motorcycles, because they just fly down the corridor between the cars. Those dotted, the striped lines, those are for the motorcycles. That's their lane. Waze, the app, the GPS app, it was the first, at least in Brazil, to take traffic into account when calculating one's route. But there was a problem with that, an unforeseen problem. The metropolitan areas of Brazil are all high crime, very high crime, often violent. And sometimes the fastest routes would lead through some very dangerous areas of the city, and the GPS could not distinguish safe routes from unsafe ones, only slower ones from faster ones. And I remember actually a number of times, Julie and I would be going somewhere in the city, and the GPS would have us move off because of traffic, and all of a sudden we're in a really shady area. And there's just this, okay, let's just get through it. And I'm kind of, going ahead on the screen to see where we hit the next major avenue. A fair number of people ended up being robbed or carjacked or even murdered as they followed their GPS's chosen route to avoid traffic. Now, in this series on the life of Joseph, we've already noted that God's plan often includes hardship and pain. But humanity, we've all been conditioned to avoid those things at all cost, right? No matter what, seek comfort. No matter what, avoid pain. No matter what, choose the easiest out and the easiest path. And we've bought into the lie that avoiding pain is God's plan and purpose for our lives. Like that's his highest good for us. But in his providence, attempts to avoid hard things, to detour around them, can actually at times lead us to a worse place and an even more desperate outcome. Just as the attempt by some GPS users to avoid traffic would lead them into far more dangerous circumstances. Today, we're going to encounter the climax of the Joseph story. The series is going to go on for another 2 installments, 2 more weeks, but today we're going to hit that high point. We'll be looking at chapters, I know this sounds really intimidating, chapters 42 through 45. We're not going to go through all of it in detail. We're going to focus on chapter 45 because that's where the climax occurs, but we will be signposting some along the way from chapters 42 through 44. Now, if you don't have a hard copy Bible with you and you would like one to follow along, the ushers are coming back down the aisles now with some copies, and if you raise your hand, they'll give you one. So I'm going to begin by reading some of the first few verses of chapter 42, and we're just going to move through these chapters pretty quickly until we get to chapter 45. Chapter 42, verse 1, when Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt. So let's pause there. Remember our context. Joseph has risen to be second in command over all the nation of Egypt. He was the one who had advised the Pharaoh to take those 7 years of plenty and store up from those 7 years of plenty against the 7 years of famine that were going to come. The 7 years of famine came, they have now begun, and the last passage there of chapter 41 tells us that people from all the known world at the time came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph. When Joseph learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" He continued, "I've heard that there's grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die." Then 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt, but Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with the others, because he was afraid that the harm might come to him. So it's a side note here about Benjamin. I don't want to go into all the history again, but remember that one of Isaac's wives he loved more than the other, right? He loved Rachel. He did not love her sister Leah. He was married to both of them. Rachel gave birth to Joseph, and then later on she gave birth to Benjamin. So when the text refers to Benjamin as Joseph's brother, yes, the others were his half-brothers as well. Benjamin was the only other sibling that he had from both his father and his mother. So Benjamin is also precious to Jacob. So Israel's sons were among those who went down to buy grain, for there was famine in the land of Canaan also. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. Does that remind us of anything? Like what kicked off this whole story? As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he asked. "From the land of Canaan," they replied, "to buy food." Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Then he remembered his dreams about them and said to them, "You're spies. You've come to see where our land is unprotected." "No, my lord," they answered. "Your servants have come to buy food. We're all the sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies." "No," he said to them. "You've come to see where our land is unprotected." But they replied, "Your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man who lives in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more." Now, from this point, Joseph first tells his brothers that they can't leave Egypt until their youngest brother joins them there. We don't know exactly what the reasoning would have been, but with their brothers affirming to Joseph, "Look, we're all brothers," the argument is, if we were spies, it wouldn't be very smart to send an entire family, right? It's not a whole family of spies that's going to come. So Joseph is kind of saying, okay, prove it to me that you're a family, that you have this younger brother. You're going to stay here in Egypt until your younger brother comes and joins you. So Joseph imprisons all of the brothers for 3 days, and then he tells them, okay, you can go home with grain, but you got to leave one of you behind as collateral. One of you has to stay in prison here with me to be as guarantee that you will bring your youngest brother back with you. You have deprived, now, so I'm going to pick up the reading in verse 21. They said to one another, "Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come on us." Reuben replied, "Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood." They did not realize that Joseph could understand them, since he was using an interpreter. He turned away from them and began to weep, but then came back and spoke to them again. He had Simeon taken from them and bound before their eyes. So Joseph keeps Simeon, the eldest brother, behind, and the rest return home. When they arrive back in Canaan, they open up their grain sacks and they find out that the silver that they paid for grain had been returned to them. So the silver was in the mouth of all of their sacks. When they told their father that Simeon was in prison and that the only way to get him back was to send Benjamin to Egypt with them, Jacob says this, "You have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me." Then Reuben said to his father, "You may put both of my sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Entrust him to my care, and I will bring him back." But Jacob said, "My son will not go down there with you. His brother's dead. He's the only one left. If harm comes to him on the journey you are taking, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow." Now the famine was still severe in the land. So when they had eaten all the grain they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, Go back and buy us a little more food. But now the brothers remind Jacob, there's no way they can go back to Egypt without Benjamin. Jacob is incredibly resistant to that idea, but he finally relents after realizing that his entire clan would starve to death without this food from Egypt. So he tells his sons to take Joseph some gifts from Canaan, right, to kind of butter him up. Now, he doesn't know it's Joseph, of course, and also to take double the amount of silver. So he said, you're going to take the silver that you need to pay to buy more food, but then you're also going to take the silver that was returned to you. They arrive in Egypt, and Joseph commands his steward to take the brothers to his house and prepare a meal for them. Now we'll pick it up in verse 24 of 43. The steward took the men into Joseph's house, gave them water to wash their feet, provided fodder for their donkeys. They prepared their gifts for Joseph's arrival at noon because they had heard that they were to eat there. When Joseph came home, they presented to him the gifts they had brought into the house, and they bowed down before him to the ground. He asked them how they were, and then he said, "How is your aged father you told me about? Is he still living?" They replied, "Your servant, our father, is still alive and well." And they bowed down, prostrating themselves before him. As he looked about and saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son, he asked, "Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." Deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. He went into his private room and wept there. After Joseph composes himself, he comes back out. The brothers feast. He actually seats them in chronological order from the oldest to the youngest, and all of the brothers are a little bit like, how did he know this? This can't possibly just be random. How does this guy happen to put us this way? And then as the portions are served out, Benjamin gets a portion that's 5 times as big as all the other brothers. So the brothers are just a little bit on high alert. They're like, what's going on here? So as they're preparing to return home again, Joseph instructs his steward to do something different this time. He says, okay, put their silver back in their bags again, but I want you to do one more thing. I want you to put my personal silver cup, my personal goblet, I want you to put it in Benjamin's sack. So the brothers take off back for home, and after a short while, Joseph sends his steward after them, and when he catches up to them, he states, "Hey, one of you has stolen my master's cup." And of course, all the brothers are like, "What? That's ridiculous." "No, of course not." They protest their innocence, and they promise, "Say, look, if any of us, if the master, if Joseph's cup is found with any of us, then that individual will forfeit his life. You can kill him, and then the rest of us will become Joseph's slaves for life." That's what they offer. And the steward tells them that, he's like, no, my master and I, Joseph, we're merciful. We're only going to punish the guilty party. So whoever has the cup is going to be a slave in Egypt for life. And then the rest of you guys can go on home. So of course, when the search is conducted and the cup is found in Benjamin's sack, all of the brothers are absolutely horrified. Now, something interesting happens here, and it's proof, we're going to examine this a little more later, it's proof that there has been some change in the brothers. We're not sure exactly how much, but there's been a change from the way they treated Joseph, because at that point, once the cup is discovered in Benjamin's sack, who has now clearly become the father's favorite after Joseph, the steward was just going to take Benjamin. He's like, that's all we need. That's all I need. You guys are free to go. Now, it's almost like history is repeating itself. The brothers, they're like, hey, we've been here before. They could have said that, right? We've been here before. We know what to do. Here, Benjamin, give me your cloak. Let's get some blood on it. Let's take it back. We'll tell Dad we were attacked by bandits, on the road. And Benjamin was killed. But they don't. All of them return with Benjamin and the steward and the officers to Egypt. Judah, the brother who's not the oldest, Simeon's the oldest, but Judah is the one who's beginning to rise to leadership among the brothers. He tells the whole family story to Joseph. I can only imagine what Joseph is thinking. He's like, okay, I know this story. I've lived it, right? Tells the whole family story, and he pleads their case because he's convinced that if they return to Canaan without Benjamin, their dad's going to die. That'll be like the last straw. He'll die. And then we see a further change in the brothers and in Judah specifically when he makes this offer or this suggestion. So now, if the boy is not with us when I go back to your servant my father, and if my father, whose life is closely bound up with the boy's life, sees that the boy isn't there, he'll die. Your servants will bring the gray head of our father down to the grave in sorrow. Your servant guaranteed the boy's safety to my father. I said, if I do not bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before you, my father, all my life. Now then, please, let your servant remain here as my Lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return to his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come on my father. That brings us to chapter 45. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence!" So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I'm your brother, Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now don't be distressed. Do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there's been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but the Lord. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all you have. I'll provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute. You can see for yourself. So can my brother Benjamin, that it is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded me in Egypt and about everything you've seen. And bring my father down here quickly." Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept. And Benjamin embraced him, weeping. And he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Afterward, his brothers talked with him. Here is the one aspect of God's plan that I want us to draw from these many chapters. God's plan leads through, not around, hard things. We've already seen many hard things in this story, but I want to focus on a specific one because this one is active, meaning it required action on Joseph's part. The hard things so far, for the most part, in this story were primarily things that happened to him, to Joseph, that he had to endure with a godly heart and attitude. But today we witness something hard that God's plan required Joseph to do. And that hard thing is forgiveness. I realize I've taught on forgiveness often, but that's because it's one of the most foundational actions of Christian love. And at the same time, one of the areas in which the enemy of the church most commonly and easily influences the child of God. Joseph, he had an awful lot to forgive. His own brothers first plotted to murder him, then lessened their violence to just selling him as a slave, deceiving his father into thinking he was dead, betrayed, utterly abandoned. Joseph suffers for 13 years. It was 13 years from the time he was sold to the time that Pharaoh elevated him in the palace. He was a slave, then a prisoner, then forgotten in prison. 13 years of servitude, misery, and suffering, and separation. Separation from those he loved, from his father, from family members who actually liked him, from his younger brother. If anyone had a reason to hold a grudge, right? If anyone had a right to exact vengeance, it was Joseph. And then God puts the ones who had wronged him so deeply right in his grasp. Entirely under his power. Completely and utterly at his mercy. And they don't even know it. 3 times, his brothers bow at his feet. They prostrate themselves before him, and Joseph remembers his dreams and how he was mocked and hated. And now it's his time. Now it's his chance. Now the shoe is on the other foot. Now he can exact his revenge and bring the punishment that his brothers deserve. But he doesn't. You've heard me say this before. The simplest definition of forgiveness that I know, that gets right to the heart of the matter, is this. Forgiveness is the decision not to punish those who have wronged you. It's what Joseph lives out. He had the chance to truly punish his brothers. He could even have killed them. He could have executed them, and there would have been 0 blowback or repercussions, right? He wouldn't even need to hide it. He has all the power, and he chooses not to punish them. Oh, and let's add one other thing. Did the brothers deserve to be punished? I'll actually ask for a little bit of, give me a head nod or something, or a shake. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely they deserved it. So the question of forgiveness isn't whether someone deserves to be forgiven or not. No one, nobody, not you, not me, nobody deserves forgiveness. We all deserve torment and destruction. Now, you might argue and say, well, wait, hold up a second. Joseph does kind of exact some revenge. You know, he kind of puts them through a few weeks, maybe a few months of uncertainty and fear, and he kind of lords it over them. But I don't think that's what's actually going on. What Joseph was doing wasn't punishment. The fact that he did not kill them or imprison them outright revealed he'd already forgiven them. He was testing them. He was testing them to see where they were, to see if there had been any change, because he knew that he wanted to go about saving his family. But if there hadn't been reconciliation among the family themselves, if there had not been a change in his brothers, he did not want to put Benjamin's life at risk or Jacob's life at risk. And the brothers passed the test. There had been a softening of their hearts. And Joseph, remember, he overhears them in their sorrow over what they had done to him. They don't know that he can understand what they're saying, but he can. He overhears their remorse. Now, we've still not fully grasped all God's plan for Joseph. So next week, we're actually going to come to that highlight. What's the end game? What is the big, greatest thing that God's doing through Joseph? But I'll tell you this. Joseph's forgiving his brothers was an unavoidable step toward God fulfilling his plan. A few weeks ago, we were reminded of what the Apostle Paul writes in Romans 8:28 through 29, that God is working all things together for good for those who love him. And we talked about how those all things, that means all aspects of our lives, the good, the bad, the hard, the painful, the joyful, all things, he is working together toward a good end. But then in verse 29, we read what that good end is. Like what's God's end goal with us, his children, his people? It's that we would be conformed to the image of his Son. In other words, that we would be like Jesus. What has been done? so that people can be forgiven. Because the author of Hebrews says it very clearly, without blood, there's no forgiveness. In other words, someone's got to pay. And that payment is blood sacrifice. It's life. Someone has to pay. So we often think of forgiveness meaning no one has to pay. No, that's not right. Forgiveness is just a question of who pays. And Christ's death on the cross paid. He paid what I deserve to pay. And because he paid, he is the one who forgives. Jesus took to himself the consequence of our sin and forgave us. So how could we ever become like Jesus if we refuse to forgive people who have hurt us? So if forgiveness means choosing not to punish those who have wounded us, practically, what does that look like? Well, this is essential, right? Forgiveness never denies the hurt or pain. Forgiveness doesn't say, oh, it's no big deal. No, forgiveness acknowledges that it is a huge deal. It doesn't minimize the hurt. It doesn't mean saying everything is okay when it isn't. In fact, I would suggest that to forgive, one must accept the pain, because forgiveness is a willingness to live with the consequences of someone else's sin. And that sounds really harsh, but that's exactly what Jesus has done. He lived with the consequence of the sin of all of humanity because he loved us and loves us still. And the irony is that we're going to live with the consequences of what the other person did against us no matter what, right? It's been done. So we're going to live with it. But this is where we have a choice. We can live with it in the bitterness and bondage of unforgiveness, or in the godly freedom of forgiveness. So we see this played out with Joseph. He's living the consequences of the sin of his brothers for 13 years, and when he has a chance, he doesn't repay them. But again, more importantly, isn't this what Jesus did? He innocently paid the price for the sin that we committed. We rebelled, he paid. Forgiveness is rooted in the will. That means it's a choice. It's a decision which, by the grace of God, each of us can make. And something that I think confuses many of us often is that we equate forgiveness with a feeling. So we say, I can't forgive. That is not an accurate statement. I won't forgive is an accurate statement. Now, if forgiveness were a feeling, then yes. We can't control that. But forgiveness is a choice that we make by faith and out of gratitude for the forgiveness that we've received from the Lord. Generally, there are 3 ways that we punish others. Again, for many of you, this isn't new. You've heard me talk about this before. The first is, physically. We can punish people physically, and we might immediately think of, like beating them or hitting them, which, that could be a possibility. But there are other ways. Just ignoring them, or the cold shoulder, or the silent treatment. Those are all ways that we punish other people physically. The second way is verbally. Maybe a more common one, but talking about them or to them, constantly accusing, right? Always bringing up what they did. As far as the east is from the west, so far has he, the Lord, removed our transgressions from us. God says of himself that his word says, he remembers our sin no more. It doesn't mean he forgets it. It means that he will never use that sin against us. Once we've repented, once that's been given to him, he never brings that up again. So if there's a past sin in your life that you have dealt with, of which you have repented, you've confessed, you've brought it before Jesus, and there's a voice that keeps accusing you about that past sin, that is not the voice of the Holy Spirit. That is the voice of the enemy. He's the accuser. The Holy Spirit convicts, the enemy accuses. But that's something that we take on that role to others, and we accuse them over and over and over, and we refuse to let it go. Or we talk about them to others. We talk about what a terrible person they are to other people. It's a way of punishing them. And the third way is mentally. It's what goes on in our minds, like rehearsing over and over and over and over and over again what they did and what we owe them, and imagining ways that we could make them hurt, imagining ways we could punish them, imagining ways that they could suffer. As we begin to take this step toward choosing forgiveness, I think it's often important to do it out loud, to say, not to the person, hey, I forgive you for being such a jerk, but to the Lord, Jesus, in your name and by your power and by your grace, because we need his grace to forgive, I forgive so-and-so, and then list what you're forgiving him for. Say it out loud to him. Speak it. Affirm it. Again, forgiveness doesn't deny the pain, so say it. I forgive them for this, for this, for this, for this. And this choice, see, forgiveness is a path that we walk. It's something we choose each day. So today, I'm going to choose not to punish. Right? Today, it has a beginning, it doesn't have an end. So we continue to walk in that choice. Quickly, I just want to list 2 barriers to forgiveness. The first barrier is a fear that they will not pay for what they did. That is so hard for us, isn't it? It's so hard to imagine them getting off, like free from our perspective, right, with no consequences for what they did. That is so hard to accept. That goes against our sense of justice, right? But you know what? We all want justice when it relates to other people, and we all want mercy when it relates to ourselves. Are you capable of being truly just? If you've ever been to any kind of youth camp where somebody begins this prank process. So they start off with a practical prank or a joke of some kind. What's the next step? The people who were pranked, what do they have to do now? Like, what's their God-given responsibility? To prank back. But are they trying to find a prank that will just perfectly match the one that was done to them? No. It's got to be bigger and better, and the consequences for those people have to be worse. So let's make it worse. And then many of you have experienced something like this. Maybe you've experienced it in your own life. We are incapable when it comes to an issue of forgiveness for people who have wronged us. We're not capable in our broken state of meting out true justice. Do we really want God holding us accountable and making us pay for our sin? That would be justice. Forgiveness places people in the hands of God and allows him to deal with them without me getting in the way. The second fear is a fear that if I forgive, that's going to increase my suffering. That's a lie, actually. That's a lie from the enemy. The truth is that unforgiveness leads to bitterness, which leads to a miserable, painful life. As long as we refuse to forgive, we are keeping ourselves attached and tied to what that person did to you. So think about that, right? The more I'm trying to punish that person, obsessed with that person paying for what they did, and replaying over and over and over and over in my mind and in my accusations what they did, I am entirely tied, bound to that pain and to that offense. Forgiveness cuts those ties and sets you free. You may have heard this statement before, but unforgiveness, right, is like taking poison while you wait for the other person to die. There are consequences that come with refusing to forgive. One I just kind of alluded to, an increasing bitterness and misery. But the more severe one, right, the more terrifying one is that when we choose bitterness or revenge over forgiveness, we remove ourselves from the blessing of God's forgiveness. I didn't make that up. When Jesus is teaching his disciples to pray and he gives them what today we know as the Lord's Prayer, have you ever considered that the part about forgiveness seems to be flipped around the wrong way? It says, forgive us our debts or trespasses or sins, depending on your version. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. It's a conditional. It's like, Lord, forgive us as we forgive those. And if we're looking at it, we might think it should be the opposite way around, right? It should be, as you have forgiven us, as you have forgiven us, so we will forgive those who trespass against us. But it doesn't say that. It says, Lord, as I forgive, you forgive. In Matthew 18, Jesus tells that the parable of the unmerciful servant, and many of you know it, but this servant who owes an astronomical amount to the king is brought before the king. He's supposed to go into prison until he can pay off the debt. It's a debt he could never repay. Not if he worked his whole life. He would never, ever, ever be able to repay. It's just too massive. He begs for mercy and the king forgives his debt. Just does it. Now, king, obviously, that's an image of God and how he interacts with us. Well, then the unmerciful servant, as he's called, he leaves the king's presence, and on the street outside the palace, he runs into a guy who owes him, say, $10. And he says, he grabs the guy, and he says, pay me what you owe me. And the guy said, I don't have it. Please have mercy. Please just give me a little more time and I'll pay it. And he's like, no, you're going to prison until you pay the last penny. So he takes the guy to prison. Well, the servants of the king hear about it, and they report back to the king, and the king is furious. Jesus is telling the story. And so then the king revokes his forgiveness of that servant's debt. And he said, you're going to jail, you're going to prison now, and surely you will not get out until you have paid everything you owe. Now, this is the chilling part. Jesus ends that parable with this sentence. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart. If we refuse to forgive, Jesus said God removes his covering of forgiveness. And that puts us in a place of paying the price for our sin. Now, all of us would prefer to detour around unpleasantness and difficulty, right? I mean, that's something we all want to do. Certainly, each of us has experienced hurt so deep that it's difficult to even conceive of that person who hurt us never paying for what they did. But God's plan leads through, not around, forgiveness. So you know we were going to get here this morning, right? Who do you need to forgive? And then maybe you didn't have to wait real long to recall that name to mind or those names. Now, I'm going to invite you to choose to forgive them. And at the right time, you may not want to shout it out right here, but you can speak it softly, or even once we start singing, to say it out loud. Lord Jesus, in your name and because of what you've done for me, I forgive so-and-so. And as we say that, what we're saying is, I choose to not punish them anymore. Now, there's one other person that many of us need to add to that list of forgiveness, and that person is me. You, ourselves. Maybe you need to forgive me. It's entirely possible. Many of us are adept at punishing ourselves. for past failures, past sins, ways that we've disappointed ourselves or let ourselves down, or ways that we've hurt other people. And so we replay those in our minds, and we crush ourselves with that punishment. And what we're saying when we do that, it's probably not what we're intentionally trying to communicate, but what we're actually saying is that, Jesus, your sacrifice on the cross was not enough to forgive me. It might have been enough for everybody else, but I need to pay for my sin. And say maybe 6-7 years after the Lord had set me free from pornography, I remember having this moment of, I was in a living room and just like this epiphany, and just saying to myself, Nathaniel, I forgive you for those wasted years, for those years that you gave yourself to perversion, for those years that you harmed relationships with others because of your lust and your self-focus and your sin. And I choose not to punish you anymore for what is past, because you, Jesus, have forgiven me utterly and entirely. When I was a kid, we had a physical education unit every year at school that was swimming. And the PE teacher had these different levels, beginner, intermediate, and then advanced, and then life-saving. And so you'd kind of work through there were different tasks you had to perform at each one. And when you got to the life-saving one, he would throw these large, heavy rocks into the deep end of the pool. And then you had to dive down there and bring the rocks up and get them off to the edge of the pool. It was very, very difficult to do. And, he's right there watching in case you need to actually save someone. But just using that analogy, those rocks are like the sins of others against us. And the enemy has convinced us that those are incredibly valuable. The sins, what they've done to you, and your right to exact revenge is incredibly valuable. You cannot let go. And if you're treading water while you're holding an anvil or a heavy stone, you're not going to last for very long at all. It's going to pull you under. And Jesus says, you can let go. You can let go. And you can be utterly free of that. And it will never drag you down again. If we release what's been done to us, if we release those people to Jesus, to his forgiveness as we forgive them, then we come under his forgiveness and he frees us from that devastating weight. As we continue to sing and worship, I just want you to know that there are prayer ministers available here to the side. And the altar is also open if you want to come and pray at the altar. And maybe for some of you, you have believed the lie, right, that I can't forgive, but that's what it feels like. So I understand why you would say that. It feels like I cannot forgive. And maybe you would just need someone to pray with you and over you and affirm you as you forgive. Please go to one of these prayer ministers. And I just want to say this too. When we end with this kind of invitation, I want to be clear that no one's judging, no one's watching, no one's looking. So if you go to a prayer minister for something else, no one else is going to be thinking, they've got forgiveness issues. That's not what we're doing. We're not judging. We are a family, the family of God. And we want the Holy Spirit to bring us greater freedom and joy together. Let's stand as we continue to worship the Lord.